What's up everyone, I'm Tensteps. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this quick new tutorial video about sidechaining. I'm going to talk to you guys about two different ways that you can sidechain your synths, your vocals, whatever it is that you want to sidechain. There's two methods that we're going to be talking about. One is what I consider to be like the old school method, more so because it's the first method that I learned when I first started producing, and that was how I did my sidechaining for a really long time. And then the other method that we're going to talk about, which is actually going to be the first one that we're going to talk about, is how I do today. So let's talk about that. First, I'm going to play you a quick clip of this track. It's not out yet, so I'm not going to be playing you large chunks of it, just small pieces so you can kind of get my point. But if you have paid attention to any of the live streams that I've done, specifically the Trance Family San Francisco live stream or the Posh DJ's special guest set that I did, you may have heard this track, so I'm just going to play you a quick clip of it now. And that's enough for you to get my point. So we're going to go ahead and open up LFO Tool, which is what I'm using here. And LFO Tool is what I use for 99.9999999% of my sidechaining. There are other plugins out there similar to LFO Tool that you could use, stuff like Shaper Box, Volume Shaper, which I believe is from Cable Guys, if I'm not mistaken. I have that as well. That also has some cool features that LFO Tool does not, especially when it comes to sidechaining certain frequencies. It's really cool. Definitely check that out. Maybe I'll do a video on that one of these days, but I rarely use it. LFO Tool is what I use most of the time. You could also use Kickstart from Nicky Romero. However, I downloaded Kickstart before I got LFO Tool, and I really didn't like it. That's just a me thing. I know a lot of people out there use it. I couldn't stand it because it's not customizable. Here I can, modify the curves however I want. I can make it longer, shorter, add as many new points as I want, make really bizarre looking, curves. You can't do that in Kickstart. So anyway, this is where I am, and let's take a look at what it's doing. So you'll see all it's doing, it's just creating literally an LFO. It's shaping the volume of whatever it's on, and in this case, it's on my chord stack. And I can move this and make it maybe like a kind of like a half beat sidechain. But in my case, I wanted it right here. Now, the downside to this is that it can only go 4 on the floor. There may be a way, well, actually, that's not entirely true. It's steady. It's steady. There's a rate down here that you can control. So you can control the speed with the rate. So I did lie when I said it was 4 on the floor because it's not. But there is a downside here. It has to be steady. You can only pick one. Theoretically, you could automate between these, but if you have some kind of random beat where you want it to follow the kick or whatever and duck every time there's a kick, you're going to have trouble doing that with LFO Tool. Now, I understand that there is an updated version of LFO Tool that does allow you to sidechain it to MIDI and have it MIDI triggered. However, I cannot install that version for some reason. Every time I try, it reverts back to this version. It's super weird. I don't know why my computer doesn't like the new version of LFO Tool, but apparently it exists. I can't comment on it, but if you're like me and you don't have it, then you cannot use the older versions of LFO Tool to do not steady rhythms of your LFO. So that takes me over to a different part of the song right over here. So for this, I'm going to open up my kick window, or my kick stack here. Now you'll see I have my kicks here, but I also have 2 tracks up here. And these are in my default project templates that I start with all the time. I keep them hidden because 9 times out of 10 I don't use them. I used them a lot more when I was making like future bass and melodic dubstep, stuff like that. And I also used them a lot when I first started producing. So this is now going to be what I call old school method. And it may not really be old school, but it's old school to me because it was the first thing that I learned. So up here, I have 2 kick tracks. And it really doesn't matter what samples. It doesn't even have to be a kick. It could be a click, it could be a snare, it could be anything, as long as it's the length that you want your side chain to be. So you'll see I have a longer one and a shorter one. That's just default for me. And you'll see that they're both set to no output. You don't ever want to hear them. All they are is they're just following the same pattern as whatever it is you want your synths to sidechain to. Or if they weren't going to follow a kick, they could just do whatever they want. As long as you know that wherever the sample is, your sound is going to duck. So if you look here under the LFO tool, I have a sidechain compressor set up, and take a look at what happens. So in this case, it's responding to the short sidechain kick, which is this one. So this one really isn't doing anything. But this one here, it's nice and short, so it comes right back up fast. And in Logic, I use the Studio VCA algorithm for the compressor for this because it is the fastest. You'll see I actually have my release up quite high, and it still snaps back really fast. Whereas like the Platinum Digital is very, very slow to react. The Studio VCA is super, super fast. And you can play around with your threshold, your ratio, your makeup gain, but really the attack is at 0. The release is pretty high just on this one. If I was using the Platinum Digital, it would be way, way, way faster. But again, you can play around with different compressors, that you might use for this. But this would be the way to do it. You set up your compressor, you have it sidechain to a signal. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be something that isn't producing any output. You could sidechain it to your kick, but just be aware that a lot of times your kick is longer than you actually want it to sidechain to, especially if you're working with a kick that's very subby and you're sidechaining something that isn't sub. So if you're sidechaining like sub bass, for example, then that's a different story. But if you're just sidechaining some chords, if you put, let me see if I go to, there we go. So now this is actually going to sidechain to this kick. You can hear how much longer it takes to come back up, and it's just really not the vibe that I was looking for. It needed to come back up faster. It needed to punch really hard, but just kind of quickly duck out of the way of the kick. So I'm going to set this back to there. Sounds much better. So those are the 2 ways of sidechaining. There is the steady LFO tool and volume shaper and kickstart way, and then there is the using just a good old-fashioned sidechain compressor way, where it's triggered to something, whether that's something MIDI or it's something. It's your kick sample or a different sample because you want a different timing on it, whatever it might be. Those are the 2 ways that I do sidechain. Again, I use the LFO tool 99.9% of the time, just because, especially with trance music and the commercial EDM stuff, 9 times out of 10 it's very, very straightforward sidechain. You don't get a lot of this. It usually is more like this, but every so often you'll need something like this, and it's good to know how to do that. So now you know. I've been Tensteps. Thank you guys so much for watching.